The time was 1908 in the English countryside, where rolling hills and country cottages dotted the landscape as far as the eyes could see. Ida and Alice had developed a friendship that was so deep it entangled their two lives like the vine that wrapped itself around the old apple tree in the orchard. Ida lived in the big cottage on the west side of the canal. Alice, the artist, lived on the other side. The small old footbridge connected the two like their love for gardening and drawing. Ida's home burst with English gardens full of lavender, peony, foxglove, and roses in the summer. Wild honeysuckle wrapped itself around the trees in the orchard that were behind the house and climbed along the fence that surrounded them. Flowers were the way to Ida's heart. She learned to garden from her old grandmother who raised her in the gardens around the cottage. When Grandma passed, her gardens lived on through Ida. Alice lived in her cottage with her mother and father and younger siblings. Alice and Ida became friends while very young. Alice lit up Ida's world the day she moved to the cottage across the stream. Ida had longed for a companion in the lonely countryside, where most visitors had 4 legs or were of the older generation. The closest family was far off in a distance, a mile or more of a trek through the waist-high grassy fields, or down the canal in the small rowboat. Their kids were much younger than Ida, though, mere babies. So when Ida met Alice, it was a pleasant surprise. It was a beautiful blessing that day when Alice crossed the footbridge across the stream to introduce herself to Ida. They instantly bonded and became the best of friends. Many years would pass between them in the countryside cottages. Alice and Ida became inseparable. Alice was an artist. She loved to sit on her blanket in the grass while Ida tended to the garden. Sometimes she would dip her toes in the water while hanging over the footbridge, watching and sketching Ida and her gardens as she tended to her beautiful flowers. Ida would constantly stop what she was doing to teach Alice about her favorite plants. She would bring them over to Alice on her blanket and tell her every little detail about the blossom, the stem, the pests that constantly nibbled at them, and even the best places to plant them and why. Ida seemed to know everything about gardens, and she attributed all her knowledge to her sweet old granny. Alice took her sketchbook with her everywhere. She an artist on paper, and Ida an artist of the earth. The two together created beauty in their backyard, which was the landscape that dreams are made of. They were 2 peas in a pod, like Ida would always say. Ida loved snow peas and used to tell Alice all about their amazing qualities and how they reminded her of little babies wrapped in a blanket. As the years passed, Ida and Alice began to grow in different directions. Ida desired to move back to the big city since Granny was gone. She was a young woman now and longed to someday have a family of her own. She would tell Alice that she would go away for a while, but come back in the spring when the flowers started blooming. Ida wanted to raise her children in the garden someday, and the big city life was far too far away for that. Alice was content in her cottage surrounded by the big fields. She could not imagine a place where she did not have nature as her canvas. Her drawing and painting consumed her soul, and nothing could sway her to leave her peaceful haven. Alice agreed to take care of Ida's gardens while she was away. For many years she did just that. Ida would return in the spring and leave back to the city when the first nip in the air would cool her nose. It pained Alice greatly when her friend would leave. The times between Ida's visits would tend to get a little longer at times. Even years would pass. Both women had families, began to wrinkle with age, but they still kept their cottages. Alice became a sought-after artist. Ida even took some of her drawings to a studio in the city. Alice began to get requests for her work and had a long, satisfying career creating sketches and paintings of Ida's gardens. Every day Alice would cross the footbridge and tend to Ida's plantings. Even years later, when it seemed like Ida was never coming back, she lovingly maintained them and thought of her and Ida in the hot summer months, rowing down the canal in the old rowboat with Ida at the oars and Alice in the back, drawing all of the magnificent landscape that they encountered. She would remember all of Ida's teachings about this flower or that. Ida's home looked just as she left it for the first time all those years ago. They would send each other notes back and forth on the postcards that Alice created of their sweet country life. There were many between them. The constant in each was the same request by Alice: "When are you coming home?" After all those years passed, this is the one thing that brought the most joy to Alice, was Ida's returning to her gardens. So much time had gone by. Ida's gardens were bursting with new growth since she had left, lovingly tended to by her best friend Alice, awaiting her return, as Alice always did. Alice felt time slipping away. It began to get more difficult for her to take care of the gardens. The hedges became overgrown, and the old apple trees began to droop and drop apples too early in the season. But Alice still crossed the stream and painted the gardens as she remembered them. She painted a postcard for Ida, hoping it would remind her of the beauty of her country cottage and entice her to return home. On the postcard, she said what she always said: "When are you coming home?" This time, for the first time, there was no answer back. Instead, one day, Ida's daughter returned. Alice could see her across the footbridge, just a stone's throw away. Her daughter smelling the roses with a tear down her cheek. Alice knew. She opened her old box of postcards from Ida. She untied the twine that held them together. She brought them to her lips, then to her heart, and held them there for a moment as she softly fell into her rocker.